Jack and Marc Show present a history of apothecaries during medieval times.
So he started losing money, so he couldn't buy food anymore, right? So he started to lose weight, and after about a decade, he could fit through the door.
And he went outside, and he had never been out from under a roof. He created one of the first umbrellas made out of a bunch of planks on a stick, and it was his portable roof that he would carry around with him, just so he could deal with being under open sky.
Didn't he go to confront King Bulbous Bucolic?
He did exactly that, and he said, "What the fuck? I've been in that place for 20 years of my life. I grew up in there. I want compensation for pharmacist abuse."
And that was a well-known phenomena in those days, was PA.
And most people didn't even know what a pharmacist was, so they didn't have much compassion. As a consequence, a bunch of pharmacists from the village got together and had a Pharmacists' Day protest parade. And the people said, "Well, what are you protesting?" And they said, "We're protesting pharmacist abuse." And they said, "Well, what's a pharmacist?" They said, "Well, we're the guys who work in the apothecary." And they said, "No,
you're apothecarists."
And they said, "Well, listen, now we're just arguing semantics." Then a big brawl broke out, and just to make things more interesting, someone decided to unchain Big Yellow Fever Hal, and that became a Royal Kingdom holiday, and they would do that once a year.
What was the holiday called? The release of Yellowface?
Yeah, the release of Yellowface during a pharmacist abuse parade.
TRYFDAPA.
And this all took place while Black Death Fernando was bitching to King Bucolic. And they missed the whole thing, and they were pissed off because they weren't at the first one. That's why it got decreed a national holiday, because the king said, "Well, I missed a good brawl, and I want it to happen again," so they booked it for the next year.
Now, he had a wife, didn't he?
Madame Brassballs, I think. Something like that. It was an odd name, Brassballs. I think she named herself after some exotic fruit.
Well, it was metaphorical. There was no real brass or balls.
No, but it was a funny name, and it would make people laugh, but you couldn't laugh. If you went to the royal court and the king said, "May I present to you my queen, Madame Brassballs," then if you laughed, you'd be in big trouble then. Oh boy, they'd say, "Okay, take him out and lance his boil."
And what if he didn't have a boil?
Well, that was the thing. They didn't care if he had a boil or not.
Eventually, they abandoned the boil part. They just said, just lance. So they could lance whatever they wanted.
Yeah, well, they would just draw a boil onto whoever they were punishing.
Now, what about pimples?
Oh, well, there was two available cures. I think one was expensive and the other one was cheap.
Just lance.
Yeah, that was the most inexpensive cure. And then the expensive cure was a formula where you had to lay face down in a tub of mud from Placenta Field. Unfortunately, they didn't orchestrate a method for the person to breathe.
That was like the budget hiccup. The death rate was 100%.
Yeah, but it solved the pimples. Now, you wanted to be careful when you went into town looking for a cure, who you went to. Because if you went to a barber, he would just say, "Just cut it off." And if you went to King Bulbous Bucolic, he would just say, "Drink 6 liters of this liquid concoction." And if you went to Black Death Fernando's apothecary, he would just say, "Bring me a 6-course meal. And then I'll let you stay for 3 days in my special customer visitation box. And then we can have a fine conversation, and you'll feel much better when I'm done." Now, at least this cure had the lowest death rate, but basically you were just a captive audience.
In a literal sense.
It was a ploy, of course, because it had nothing to do with the cure. It was just to have a captive friend for a while.
Now, once Black Death Fernando escaped, didn't he go into the woods and search for some more medical cures? Didn't he find strange plants and he started to experiment with those?
Oh yeah, he was one of the first apothecaries to use magic mushrooms. And as a consequence, he created some of the first hippies.
The word groovy, it comes from him.
And you know hippies, they love to put on musicals. And so Black Death Fernando ended up getting credited for one of the first musicals.
Oklahoma. Didn't he write Oklahoma?
Well, the medieval forest hippies, stoned on magic mushrooms, wrote the musical. Of course, Oklahoma didn't exist then yet, and it meant a different thing.
It meant your wife has the head in the shape of a perfect cube. That's what Oklahoma meant. If you said that to someone, it was an insult.
The ultimate insult.
Now, what about the hypodermic needle? What's the history of the hypodermic needle?
Someone said, why don't we get a lance and hollow it out? But it resulted in an accidental impaling.
Oh, what about animals? Many animals were used in the history of apothecaries and drugs.
Goats were very popular.
Didn't matter what you have. The first treatment was always to stand behind a goat while the doctor would tell jokes, try to get the goat to laugh, and then the goat would fart in your general direction.
That was one of the first historical attempts at stand-up comedy because someone had to amuse the goat.
Whatever happened to Yellow Face and Yellow Fever Hal?
Oh, they became a duo of singing pantomimes.
Oh, right, because they had a vaudeville era back then.
They would reenact all the screw-ups that had occurred during the past year. Like they reenacted the lancing of the boil, and they reenacted when the barbers descended on the pharmacist's day parade and started that big brawl.
Our understanding of this period of history comes from them. Wasn't there, like the Rosetta Stone, some tablets that were found in this apothecary town that helped them to decipher all this story that we've been talking about?
Oh, yes. It was 2 hunks of slate that weighed about 500 pounds each, and they were part of the apothecary floor.
Well, it was Black Death Fernando because it was in his apothecary that these tablets were found.
Yes, it's all in his hand scribblings.
Because he had nothing to do. He couldn't leave. He was too big. That's why his role in this story seems somewhat elevated.
Yeah, he wrote the story, so he made himself look pretty good.
That's why some people don't believe it. Really? Can you lose 1,000 pounds? That requires a Herculean effort.
He had the best weight loss program in the whole kingdom.
Well, the Black Death diet, that was his diet.
It was his diet, but what people didn't realize is that he had all this exercise equipment in the back room.
Yeah, he invented exercise equipment.
Yeah, he built one of the first treadmills out of animal skins and logs. And then he also did what he called the big roll around, where he would just roll around on the floor. And then he figured, why not get someone to massage me instead of me having to do it myself? And he started one of the first massage parlors.
I mean, it turned out later, Black Death Fernando was actually a woman, Fernandita. She was the madam of the apothecary brothel. In the end, it wasn't really an apothecary, it was a brothel.
Yes, well, in the end, she went with what made the most money. People weren't buying the cures anymore. They just wanted to lose weight and have a good time.
Because what is more preferable, fornication or having a lance boiled? In the end, it's no decision at all.
Have a nice massage, roll around on the stone floor, there was vaudeville entertainment, and feel better about yourself. Everything got incorporated into the main massage parlor. It became the biggest building in the village.
Wow, and eventually revival King Bulbous Bucolic's residence. Black Death Fernandita became queen.
And then King Bulbous Bucolic fell in love with Queen Black Death Fernandita. And then, of course, his own queen,
Brass Balls.
Queen Brass Balls. And she didn't care because she was tired of having King Bulbous Bucolic's ridiculous name. So she went off and started her own fitness club called Brass Balls and Vaudeville.
We have concluded our broadcast schedule for today. Good night.